إنا أوحينا إليك هذا القرآن وإن كنت من قبله لمن الغافلين إذ قال يوسف لأبيه يا أبت إني رأيت 11 كوكبا والشمس والقمر رأيتهم لي ساجدين قال يا بني لا تقصص رؤياك على إخوتك فيكيدوا لك كيدا إن الشيطان للإنسان عدو مبين وكذلك يجتبيك ربك ويعلمك من تأويل الأحاديث ويتم نعمته عليك وعلى يعقوب كما أتمها على أبويك من قبل إبراهيم وإسحاق إن ربك عليم حكيم لقد كان في يوسف وإخوته آيات للسائلين إذ قالوا ليوسف وأخوه أحب إلى أبينا منا ونحن عصبة إن أبانا لفي ضلال مبين اقتلوا يوسف أو اطرحوه أرضا يخل لكم وجه أبيكم وتكونوا من بعده قوما صالحين قال قائل منهم لا تقتلوا يوسف وألقوه في غيابة الجب يلتقطه بعض السيارة إن كنتم فاعلين قالوا يا أبانا ما لك لا تأمنا على يوسف وإنا له لناصحون أرسله معنا نرتع ونلعب وإنا له لحافظون قال إني ليحزنني أن تذهبوا به وأخاف أن يأكله الذئب وأنتم عنه غافلون قالوا لئن أكله الذئب ونحن عصبة إنا إذا لخاسرون فلما ذهبوا به وأجمعوا أن يجعلوه في غيابة الجب وأوحينا إليه لتنبئنهم بأمرهم هذا وهم لا يشعرون وجاءوا أباهم عشاء يبكون قالوا يا أبانا إنا ذهبنا نستبق وتركنا يوسف عند متاعنا فأكله الذئب وما أنت بمؤمن لنا ولو كنا صادقين وجاءوا على قميصه بدم كذب قال بل سولت لكم أنفسكم أمرا فصبر جميل والله المستعان على ما تصفون وجاء السيارة فأرسلوا واردهم فأدلى دلوه قال يا بشرى هذا غلام وأسروه بضاعة والله عليم بما يعملون وشروه بثمن بخس دراهم معدودة وكانوا فيه من الزاهدين. وقال الذي اشتريه من مصر لامرأته أكرمي مثواه عسى أن ينفعنا أو نتخذه ولدا. وكذلك مكنا ليوسف في الأرض ولنعلمه من تأويل الأحاديث والله غالب على أمره ولكن أكثر الناس لا يعلمون. ولما بلغ أشده آتيناه حكما وعلما وكذلك نجزي المحسنين. وراودته التي هو في بيتها عن نفسه وغلقت الأبواب وقالت هيت لك قال معاذ الله إنه ربي أحسن مثواي إنه لا يفلح الظالمون. ولقد همت به وهم بها لولا أن رأى برهان ربه كذلك لنصرف عنه السوء والفحشاء إنه من عبادنا المخلصين. واستبق الباب وقدت قميصه من دبر وألف يا سيدها لدى الباب قالت ما جزاء من أراد بأهلك سوءا إلا أن يسجن أو عذاب أليم. قال هي راودتني عن نفسي وشهد شاهد من أهلها إن كان قميصه قد من قبل فصدقت وهو من الكاذبين. وإن كان قميصه قد من دبر فكذبت وهو من الصادقين. فلما رأى قميصه قد من دبر قال إنه من كيدكن إن كيدكن عظيم. يوسف أعرض عن هذا واستغفري لذنبك إنك كنت من الخاطئين. وقال نسوة في المدينة امرأة العزيز تراود فتاها عن نفسه قد شغفها حبا إنا لنريها في ضلال مبين. فلما سمعت بمكرهن أرسلت إليهن وأعتدت لهن متكأ وآتت كل واحدة منهن سكينا وقالت اخرج عليهن. فلما رأينه أكبرنه وقطعن أيديهن وقلن حاشا لله ما هذا بشرا إن هذا إلا ملك كريم. قالت فذلكن الذي لمتنني فيه ولقد راودته عن نفسه فاستعصم ولئن لم يفعل ما آمره ليسجنن وليكونن من الصاغرين. قال رب السجن أحب إلي مما يدعونني إليه وإلا تصرف عني كيدهن أصب إليهن وأكن من الجاهلين. فاستجاب له ربه فصرف عنه كيدهن إنه هو السميع العليم. ثم بدا لهم من بعد ما رأوا الآيات ليسجننه حتى حين. ودخل معه السجن فتيان قال أحدهما إني أريني أعصر خمرا وقال الآخر إني أريني أحمل فوق رأسي خبزا تأكل الطير.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you all for coming to our Muharram lecture series on 23 years of prophethood and transformation. This year's lecture series is sponsored on behalf of the marhumin displayed on the TV just outside of the chapel. Please can we recite a Surah Fatiha for all of these marhumin as well as other marhumin. Al-Fatiha. Also, just a quick health and safety note. In the event of any emergency, we have fire exits located at the back of the chapel, by the main entrance, outside the chapel, and the double doors by the dining room. Can I also request that you cannot park on the roundabout? If you have done so, then please move your car immediately. The conference room is available for families with children, and we encourage these families to use the conference room. Without further ado, I would like to invite Shaykh Arif to deliver tonight's lecture. Please can I request you all to move as far forward as possible with a salawat to make space for others. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Bismillah, there's going to be a lot more people joining us inshallah, so please bring it in. Thank you, people. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
رحم الله من قرأ الفاتحة. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين شفيع ذنوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا وحبيب قلوبنا أبي القاسم محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين وأصحابه المنتجبين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى قيام يوم الدين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. أما بعد، السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. أعظم الله أجورنا وأجوركم بمسابنا بأبي عبد الله الحسين عليه الصلاة والسلام. We concluded on this note that the message in reality was not what the Prophet was preaching in terms of the revelation of the Quran. The message in reality was the embodiment of the Quran through the being of the Blessed Prophet. So the Blessed Prophet was the real message that was being imparted. There exists a very intimate and an inextricable connection between the Prophet and the Quran. Now, it is true to say that the people who were around the Blessed Prophet acknowledged his noble character and his noble trait, but at the same time, they did not accurately know that he would become the Prophet, even though they were expecting a Prophet to come. Yet, when the revelation came upon him, they were very quick to acknowledge that yes, he is the right candidate. So, for example, when he confided to his wife, Bibi Khadija, about what had happened in the mountain, he went to her cousin who was a Christian priest, Nestorian priest, Waraka bin Nawfal. And he said, yes, a prophet is or was promised, and Muhammad is the prophet. And he went to him and he said, look, these people will drive you out of Makkah. If I am around at that time, I will support you and I will assist you. Similarly, Hazrat Abu Talib, he was not surprised that when the Prophet claimed prophethood. Or Imam Ali, although Imam Ali was very young. Similarly, the first Khalifa, Abu Bakr, he wasn't surprised. He was a friend of the Prophet and he embraced the prophethood of the Prophet Muhammad. Now, there was a distinction in the minds of the people between the Prophet and between the revelation. Today, we don't seem to think there is a distinction, but yes, there is a real distinction. Although they are inextricably connected as one, there is a distinction between the two. Now, this distinction works well because on the one hand, you're seeing a human example that is like us himself. On the other hand, you're seeing the revelation molding him and bringing the best out in him. And we can then, at that point, be empowered that we too have the ability to improve and become better. And this is exactly what was happening to those around him, as we shall develop this theme a bit more today. Now, this distinction was very, very obvious. The eschatology that the Prophet was giving them, the end of time events, the nature of Qiyamah, the heaven, the hell, they knew that this Prophet himself cannot intuit such realities and truths. Because the Meccan context, as we will see in the days to come, was such that they vehemently, for the major part, denied any belief in the hereafter. And we have verses attesting to that. And that's why we see such huge emphasis within the Quran, talking of belief in God and the hereafter. It was in direct response to their attitudes and their beliefs. So when the Prophet read about the happenings of the last day and how it will come about, they knew there is a distinction between the person and the revelation. Similarly, when he was explaining about the nature of God, the angels, the jinn, as the Quran was giving them the notion of jinn, they understood that this is a very different understanding to anything that we have known. So they understood that there is a distinction between what this man is and between what he is saying. Then again, the language of the Quran, as we explained yesterday, it was so rich, so new to their ears, so eloquent and so precise that they knew that he has never spoken in this way previously. Abu Sufyan is at one point quoted to have said, but he has never spoken like this previously. So that distinction was there in the minds of the people. Yet they also understood that there was a connection between the two that cannot be denied, and it's a intimate connection. Now, as I said, this worked well for the message, the deliverance of the message, because the people saw that he suffers. He feels anxiety. He feels fear. And yet, he is able to overcome them. He is able to bring the best out in his own self through God. So in this way, it was working in a positive sense within the minds of the people, that he is one like us, the revelation has taken hold of him, the revelation is molding him, the revelation is guiding him. So I want to re-emphasize that point once again, that he was not somebody who stood there and spoke out the revelation. He is somebody who embodied the revelation, because he would say that the revelation is saying, trust in God. And he, despite his frailty, would then trust in God and go forward in the way of God. He would feel fear of the enemies, yet he would say, Allah is the one to be feared no matter what they do. And Allah is not giving me any guarantees that I shall come through this trial. Nonetheless, I will trust in Allah and face their wrath. And he went forward. This was the thing that was the real message, the embodiment of the Quran within the attitude and the conduct of the Prophet. And that is what ultimately got to the minds of the people, that yes, he is a living testimony to the truth that he is proclaiming. Now, even if we say that, and we look at the message of the Quran, we will say, yes, it's a very God-centered message, very God-oriented message. If you look at the Quran, you can't fail to see this from the beginning till the end. God wants the removal of everything and anything aside from himself. Quran is the most God-centered of the scriptures that we have before us within human history, at least those that I have seen. It's a very God-centered book. However, the revelation, the message is God-centered. But go and think about this. The revelation is wholly Prophet-centered. It is centered upon the Prophet in its entirety. You find this thing in the Quran, that it is all about the personal context and the societal context of the Prophet that the Quran is addressing. The Prophet faces problems, those problems are then remedied by the Quran. The problem faces fear, the verse telling the Prophet to take heart are revealed. The Prophet feels defeated, the verses are revealed to encourage the Prophet upon the path once again. People are his enemies, Tabbat yada Abi Lahabin wa tab comes, that this Abu Lahab who is giving you so much grief, O Prophet, he will perish, you will prevail. So we are seeing that the Prophet is not somebody who is preaching the Quran. There's something amazing going on here. The Prophet is the vehicle, the medium for the Quran. And now when we read the Quran, we find this verse, Inna anzalnahu fi laylatin mubarakatin. We have revealed it in a blessed night, which seems to tell us that the whole Quran has been revealed in one go. And of course, the Quran uses two different forms of Arabic verbs, inzal and tanzil. Inzal would mean revealed in one go. Tanzil means sequentially revealed. Both of them are being employed in terms of the revelation of the Quran. So we see that the Quran is revealed in one go. Where? Then we see another verse. نزل به روح الأمين على قلبك. Ruhul Amin has descended with the Quran upon your heart, O Muhammad, so that you may be of the warner. So what we are seeing here, and this is what we want to explore now, is that the Quran in an undifferentiated, or let's talk about it in a different language, and Tabatabai explains this in relation to some of the verses that says, and then fassalna, we separated the Quran, i.e. it was revealed as meaning, one full meaning upon the soul of the Prophet, and then gradually it was split, separated into words and verses, and that then was given by the Prophet when the circumstances occasioned it. So on the one hand, we are finding this curious situation that the Prophet has got the whole of the Quran at one shot, and then he himself may not know it, and then he himself is being ignited from within, and he is being reminded and he is reciting it. There's an amazing thing here. Sometimes Jibreel comes to the Blessed Prophet and reads the verses, but at the same time you find this verse, that it is all coming from inside. He has revealed it to your heart, and therefore Jibreel is merely reminding him of what is within him, and that thing that is within him is being shaped and phrased in accordance with the occasions and the challenges that the Blessed Prophet is facing. So the whole phraseology of the Quran, the verses, they are modeled in accordance with the immediate and the broader context of the Blessed Prophet. So the Prophet is the absolute context for the revelation. So now you might ask, and I'm going to hopefully explore this a little while, in a little while, that what about the verses? Huwa al-awwalu wal-akhiru wal-zahiru wal-batin. He is the first, he is the last, he is the apparent, he is the hidden. It is because the Blessed Prophet was yearning deep within, through all those years of meditation, to understand the truth. And it was his conducive state of soul that brings this meaning through him, and he is the vehicle and the medium to bring it all out. And he is one of the most untarnished mediums that does not adulterate the Quran. As it is coming, the pure meanings, his heart is not adulterating it, and he is giving it all out. So this is how phenomenally integral the Blessed Messenger is to the whole message and to the Quran itself. So granted that when the whole Quran comes, it is in an undifferentiated state. But the Quran that we have today is beholden in its entirety to the Blessed Prophet, with that phenomenal eloquence of the Quran, the in-depth meaning of the Quran. These are all phrased in accordance with what I feel is coming through the condition, the human condition of the Blessed Prophet, and he himself was learning, exploring, and growing through this wonderful truth. Now let us look at examples. His relationship with the revelation in his humanness. And this is why the Quranic message and the prophetic message has enjoyed such a lot of success, because it has come within a human context. There is humanness about it. So now, this deep connection in which the Prophet was prompting the revelation. Look at the first revelation, the first few verses that were revealed. Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq, khalaqa al-insana min alaq, Iqra wa rabbuka al-akram alladhi allama bil qalam. Why would these verses be revealed as the first verses? Read. Through the name of your Lord, the one who created man from a clot. Read. And your Lord is most noble, who taught man by the pen taught him what he knew not. Now this is the Quran talking about a distant past history of humanity. Now the Prophet's immediate reaction here is, well, I can't read. I know the Shias will get angry at me for saying this, but we already pointed it out yesterday, that the Quran says you did not read anything, you did not recite anything, and you did not write anything with your right hand before this day. So the Prophet said, I cannot read. But why were these verses phrased in this way, if these were indeed the first verses? Is there a possibility that the Blessed Prophet in his own mind, when he was reflecting, trying to understand the truth, trying to understand, where am I from? What is happening? Where am I going? Why am I here? These fundamental questions that exist at the core of every heart. Was he paying heed to those questions? And in that, thinking we don't have recourse to any knowledge, any books. And we cannot read. We are a people, by and large, we do not read. We do not have any recourse to knowledge. Could that sentiment have prompted these verses and the way they are phrased? Think about this carefully. Why say Iqra to somebody who cannot read, or there is nothing there to be read? You see, look, if the Prophet could read, then the Prophet would have said, bring me the parchment or the book that I can read. Can you see that? What's the point of saying Iqra, read, when there is nothing in front of you to read from? Read what? And who are you? Can you see this? So was it that particular thing inside the Blessed Prophet that prompted the initial revelation to be phrased in that particular manner? I believe it is very possible as we go through this. Now the verses were revealed. And I will go through these verses afterwards, after these verses, to purify himself and stand in prayer, but he was not told to preach. However, when he was told to preach and proclaim the message, there was a brief pause in which the message stopped coming. Now here, he became perplexed and became worried. Have I become abandoned by God? Has God forsaken me? The Quraysh were taunting him. What has happened to your message? At that point, this surah comes, وَالضُّحَى وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجَى مَا وَدَّعَكَ رَبُّكَ وَمَا قَلَى. Your God has not abandoned you, and He has not left you alone. It is in direct response to what the Prophet was encountering internally and externally. And then look at this. وَلَلْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ لَكَ مِنَ الْأُولَى. The hereafter is better for you than this world. So it's consoling the Prophet. Directly in line with what the Prophet is feeling. And then look at this verse. وَلَسَوْفَ يُعْطِيكَ رَبُّكَ فَتَرْضَى. And afterwards, your Lord will give you to the extent that you will be pleased. So don't worry, you are on a mission that will be successful. These are the psychological states of the Prophet that the Quran is addressing, and it is phrasing itself in accordance with what the Prophet is thinking and encountering. It is very possible that these are the sentiments internally within the Prophet that are prompting the phraseology of the verses of the Quran. How the Quran verses are being phrased. Now look at this. Alam yajidka yatiman fa'awa. So he's consoling the Prophet and reminding him, Alam yajidka yatiman fa'awa. Did He not find you an orphan and give you shelter? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying to the Prophet that, look, it was me who was doing all of those things. I was watchful over you. These are not coincidences that were happening. These were planned events in your life. وَوَجَدَكَ ضَالًا فَهَدَى. He found you looking, searching, and He guided you through this revelation. وَوَجَدَكَ عَاقِلًا فَأَغْنَى. He found you poor, in need, and He made you needless through the work and the business that He created for you, and afterwards the marriage with Bibi Khadija. I need to drive home this point a little bit more. Look at the incident when Bibi Aisha went missing. Now, it was not an easy event for the Blessed Prophet. He is a prophet. And whether the Shias like this or not, the Prophet had a special place for Aisha. He did. When we read the history book, he liked her. She was charming, she was eloquent, she was playful, and he liked her company. Now, she goes missing. Tongues start wagging. There is slander, there is gossip, there is accusation. The Prophet is baffled. He is baffled. What to do now? There is no decision that he can take. He's been given the advice, well, if she has behaved like this, and if it's something that you don't understand, the nature of it, and if it is overburdening for your soul, then divorce her. God has given you that option. But the Prophet cannot do that. He is the blessed Prophet. Unlike Moses, who pulled Aaron's hair and beard first and then asked him questions afterwards. Do you remember that incident? Moses just threw the tablets, he grabbed his brother's beard and hair and dragged him in a rage. And then he thought, well, why did you not stop them? Well, you should ask first, right? You shouldn't beat him up first. Ask him first. I'm just trying to, through humor, convey a point of the humanness of these blessed souls, and yet how God honors them in their humanness. In any case, the Prophet, in his humanness, was perplexed. This was his psychological state. Then Aisha goes to her father's house, Abu Bakr. After some time, the history that I've read, after some time he goes and visits her. And he feels a sense of comfort. He feels a sense of relief in his soul. And the verse comes. How is that? And those people who came with ifk, false accusations, لا تحسبه شر لكم. It's not an evil for you, it's good for you. And the one who was responsible will have a share of his punishment. And the verse is in itself, in its own place. But the timing of the verse, that verse could have come much sooner. Why did that verse come after that lengthy pause? Why was it that when he felt a sense of comfort, that's when that verse came? Think about the other verses. The verses of privacy. And the verses of people or Sahaba being a nuisance. They used to go inside his house, just sit there and talk with him and make small talk with him and look at everything around the house and comment. Now, and sometimes they would just go and talk with his wives casually and so on and so forth. Look at the verse. Oh, you, if you are invited to the house of the Prophet, eat and leave. Do not hang about, looking at his pots and pans and making small talks. This is something that is a cause of nuisance. It's a nuisance for the Prophet. It causes him discomfort. But he feels shy in telling you. Yet God feels no embarrassment. Now go away. So the Prophet was given respite from his Sahaba when he felt a nuisance. But the verse came in at that point. Isn't that intriguing? Isn't that intriguing? Or the verse of behind the veil. When you call on to them, speak with them behind the veil. Obviously, the Prophet felt it was undignified, and the Prophet did not know what to do. The verse came. The verse says, speak to them from behind the veil. Be dignified. These people might have intentions in their hearts that might not be wholesome. Then, it's amazing, these verses. The verse of people talking loudly in front of him. So the Prophet would be talking, and the Sahaba would talk over him. The Quran says to them, do not talk over the Blessed Prophet. Least your deeds come to naught without you knowing it. These basic etiquettes were being taught to the people. But as the Prophet was finding himself in those positions, the verse of giving sadaqah, everybody would go and sit with the Prophet and take his time. And one of the traits of the Prophet was that he would never say no to anybody. And he would never leave the company of a person talking with him until that person left his company first. That was the trait of the beloved Prophet. So the verse came. Now when you want to consult with him, give sadaqah. So everybody stopped going. But that's not the interesting part. There is something else that happened. Imam Ali immediately gave some sadaqah and went and sat with the Prophet. That's Imam Ali, and you can't get another one like him, right? That's Imam Ali. But the Sahabi, the likes of me, possibly said, yeah, well, all this small talk, who needs it anyway, right? So now nobody was going to him, so the verse was abrogated. Isn't that odd? The verse comes, if you want to consult with him, talk with him, then give sadaqah. So all of a sudden the Prophet is left alone, and that's not very good either, is it? So then the verse is abrogated immediately after Imam Ali enacts the verse. It's abrogated. Maybe Imam Ali knew that, the way the revelation is working, it'll probably be abrogated very soon, because these dudes are not going to go and sit with him anymore, and he needs them to sit with him anyway, right? So look at this thing that is happening there. There is a human context and his personal context that is causing and prompting the revelation, phrased precisely in the way that it ought to be phrased to remedy his own situation. Now the verse talking about Zainab, the wife of his adopted son Zayd. Surah Ahzab, you know this. And when you told the one that God has favored, Amsik alayka zawjak, keep your wife. فَلَمَّا قَضَى زَيْد مِنْهَا وَطَرًا. And when Zayd divorced her, we married her to you. Now the verse says, Allah will reveal what you are concealing in your heart, O Muhammad. Allah is worthier for you to fear rather than you fearing human beings. When this verse came, and he got the permission to marry the wife of his previously adopted son, which was then, the law was abrogated, obviously, or abolished, because it wasn't institutionalized by Islam. It was a pagan sort of a law that the Prophet had made Zayd his son, and you know the history there. So now this thing was frowned upon amongst the context, within the Medinan context, because they were still living in the pagan context, and the Prophet was not that popular at that point, and his religion was not the religion that's embracing Medina. The Quran came and remedied the situation in accordance with the demands of the prophetic personal circumstance. Now you can marry the wives of your claimed sons. Bibi Aisha says here, O Prophet, it is amazing how your God always gives decisions in your favor. Now, of course, being a woman, she was jealous. Now, she was jealous, right? And so she couldn't contain herself, but she made that comment. It is amazing how the Quran always gets revealed in your favor. But that's not the case, because the Quran went against the decision of the Prophet as well. A man came with his daughter to the Prophet, and he said her husband has hit her. The Prophet then said, let her seek retaliation. Let her seek justice, qisas. So the man went away. And this verse was revealed. الرجال قوامون على النساء بما فضل الله بعضهم على بعض. Men are the governors of women in accordance with the grace that God has given to some or others, and in accordance with the wealth that men expend upon their women. So the Prophet called them back. He said, I intended a thing, God intended otherwise. She has no right to seek retaliation or justice, because the end of the verse says, then hit them if they are disobedient or insubordinate, then hit them. There are long discussions on this verse, which we will conduct in a different series of talks at some time. But here, the Quran goes against the judgment of the Prophet. Then again, in Surah Isra, the Quran says to the Prophet, وَلَوْلَا أَنْ ثَبَّتْنَاكَ لَقَدْ كِدْتَ تَرْكَنُوا إِلَيْهِمْ شَيْئًا قَلِيلًا. So the Prophet's eager desire to somehow find reconciliation with the Meccans and the Quraysh, he was being convinced of a certain suggestion. The Quran steps in and says to the Prophet, had we not made you firm, you were about to recline towards them somewhat. And of course, the rest of the verse is very harsh, as you know. But here again, the Quran is going against what the Prophet has decided. But tell me, isn't this the very humanness that we go through? We know for a fact that this is the principle and maybe I should stick to it. However, maybe it is better to, at this point, to relent slightly, to accommodate the other. Aren't these the very processes that go through us? These are the very processes going through the Blessed Prophet. And the revelation comes and remedies them. And then again, the Prophet adjudicated a case in Medina where he falsely charged a Jewish group of people or a household for stealing something that was planted in their house on the weight of evidence. So the Quran comes, Surah Nisa, I believe, and says they were trying to misguide you. Had Allah not intervened? This is again, we can see that the Quran is governing the Prophet. The people are seeing that this is a person, he is taking decisions. He is being rectified. He is saying things. He is being told to say otherwise. It's a very, very real story that is unfolding. He is evolving. He is experiencing. He is being guided step by step. And that was the real model of the Prophet. Then again, we will find in the lectures to come that the main source of income for that time was raids. They would raid caravans. It was a norm at that point. But the caravans that the Prophet raided was the caravan of the enemy, the Meccans. So it appears that the people of Medina were questioning, how can a Prophet raid a caravan? The verses came and said, their expelling you from Makkah is far worse than this. This is in retaliation to that. And therefore you can see that he takes a decision in his humanness. And the Quran comes and justifies it. So they are in sync at that point. Then we see the whole event of Sulh Hudaybiyah, where Umar questions whether he is a messenger or not. So people are seeing this distinction. Is he a messenger because he has given in so much in the Treaty of Hudaybiyah? On the way back, Surah Fath is revealed, saying to the Prophet that this particular compromise that you've made with them, this treaty, is a great victory for you. And indeed, it was a great victory. As it transpired, it was one of the most brilliant moves that the Prophet had ever made. So he did that to the best of his understanding, and it was the most accurate decision. And the Quran comes and justifies it, and the minds of the people, like Khalifa Umar, are put to rest. And they say Umar regretted that for a very, very long time. But he was definitely afraid that the surah will be revealed against him. That we know from history. Yeah. Now we are seeing the steady growth process of the Blessed Prophet. He himself was being reformed. He himself was being fine-tuned at every step. Now, although I know the Shias will fight with me for saying this, but the hadith is there in Majma' al-Bayan. Allama Tabatabai quotes it in his Tafsir al-Mizan. Then Allama Tabatabai gives his own views and says, well, I don't really believe in this hadith because it's inconsistent with the conduct of the Prophet. Now, the Blessed Prophet was eager to preach the message in his humanness. So he found an opportunity to talk with one of the chiefs of Makkah and to express to him what his message was. Now at that point, a blind man comes to the Prophet to consult with the Prophet. Now either that happened, or the blind man had come to the Prophet first, and he wasn't leaving the Prophet and was talking and talking and talking, and the Prophet saw that this man is standing there and this opportunity will go. Now that is the most innocent thing anybody can do, to turn from one to the other. Can you see that? When somebody is talking with you so excessively and not letting you go, and that is the context. And you're seeing there's somebody else here, and this is an ideal opportunity, and I may miss out on it. It is the right thing to do. I will not say it is our human condition, but it is the right thing to do as well. It is something that is commendable, that okay, you've been talking for such a long time, let me just have a few words with him, I'll come back to you. Or you have just come, you're interrupting a conversation, let me just finish with him and I'll get back to you. To me it seems that whenever the Prophet was talking with somebody, he would not leave them until they finished, and then he would turn to the other one. So it seems more likely that the Majma'ul Bayan account is right more than the account that some of the other narrators are giving within our Sunni books. So there's the blind man. He's talking with the Prophet. Now, he's continuously talking with the Prophet, and the Prophet sees an opportunity in front of him to talk to a chief or a high-ranking person of Makkah. So he turns to that person, slightly, maybe, appearing to ignore the other one. These verses are revealed. Abasa wa tawalla. He frowned and turned away. And ja'ahu al-a'ma. That the blind man came to him. Now, it is amazing. How could you know? Perhaps he would cleanse himself, or he might be mindful and good counsel might avail him. Now, he who waxes indifference, you attend to him, though you are not to blame if he would not cleanse himself. But he who comes to you running, and he fears Allah, you pay no heed to him. No, indeed, this is only a reminder. So whoso wills may give heed to it. Now, what a phenomenal message this was. Think about this. The Prophet, like any of us, was saying, look, this is the message of God. If this guy gets converted, the whole community comes with him. Right? Allah is saying, no. How? This is a message, it's an admonition. For whoever wants to take it, they will take it. Your criterion, O Muhammad, is not the powerful and the influential. Your criterion is simply whoever wants to come to Allah, bring them. And let's leave the rest to me. And I have read somewhere that wherever this blind man would come to the Prophet would smile and say, welcome to the one through whom God taught me through his verses. The Prophet would say to that man, welcome to the one through whom God taught me and brought me to another pedestal of understanding. What a phenomenal message this is. Now imagine how that would impact the mind of the onlooker. That wow, he turned away from the blind man. And immediately the verse was revealed. Abasa wa tawalla an ja'ahu al-a'ma wa ma yudrika la'allahu yazakka. That then in the minds of the people stamped the truthfulness of the Prophet. That if he was not the messenger, he would not be so sincere and innocent in repeating these verses. He would cover his back. And why would anyone who is a pretentious person want to speak against his own self with such eloquent verses that are taunting him himself? Can you see that? So on the one hand, the Prophet was being educated that worry not about the powerful, about the wealthy, about the affluent. Preach the message to whoever wants to listen and come towards God. The criterion is not worldly possession. The criterion is the sincerity within the souls and the heart. That is your criterion, O Muhammad. Go forth with that and don't worry. So it was having several different levels of impact. One, it was then refining the outlook and the attitude of the Blessed Prophet. Because when you see him towards the end, he is so confident that he's not going to budge to power or to wealth or to affluence or to influence. He would not care. But these are the beginning days of the revelation in Mecca. When you see him in Medina, you find, wow, he doesn't have any of these things anymore. But in the beginning, you find them. And he is evolving and growing. And that's why this is the living message. So he had anxiety. He had worry. He had maybe certain misgivings. All of them are addressed by the Quran. The Quran says, "O Muhammad, had Allah wanted, He would have given them all their guidance. Why are you so restless in trying to guide them? If God has destined not to guide them, why are you losing sleep over it?" Can you see this? The Prophet stood at the grave of the hypocrites and sought forgiveness for them. The revelation comes, don't stand at their graves. Even if you seek forgiveness 70 times, God will not forgive them. It shows these dynamics. It's so beautiful. And then the Prophet said, I wish God would have told me, ask forgiveness 70 times and I will forgive them. And I would have gone to each grave. So here he is showing his own judgment. I wish God had done this way as opposed to that way. It's very inconsistent with our naive understanding that the Prophet would get the verse and would not think anything and say, yes, I'm going to follow this. No, he is feeling that I wish God would have told me to pray for them 70 times and I would have prayed for them, as opposed to telling me don't stand there. Isn't that phenomenal? He is expressing, and there you can see the distance between him and the revelation of a sword. But the thing is, his own personal traits were not instilled in his being by the Quran. His personal traits were his own personal makeup that the Quran uses to the advantage of the message. It says to the Prophet, had you been hard-hearted and harsh, they would have dispersed. Because the Prophet was soft. He was very soft-hearted, very caring, very forgiving, very loving. So the Quran says, "O Muhammad, had you been hard-hearted and harsh, they would have dispersed. Rather, look away, pardon them, forgive them." That was how the Prophet was, and that's why he was the ideal candidate. These moral traits of the Prophet were not instilled within him by the Quran. They were his predispositions, that the Quran uses it to the best of its ability to propagate the message. Then, the Prophet's impeccable virtues. إِنَّكَ عَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. Indeed, you are on the peak of noble traits. The Prophet had them. The Quran uses them. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. We have not sent you save as a mercy for all people. These were the things that the Prophet himself had in him that makes him that eligible candidate. Now, apart from that, what the people saw in the Prophet was that he was brave. He was somebody who would not relent when the command of God came. He stood firmly. He was truthful, charitable, honorable, kept his word, courteous, very, very forgiving and very kind. He had all the traits that you would look up to. All of this put together made the Prophet what I think is termed in the Quran as the uswa, the role model. So you know when the Muslims discuss this verse, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. Indeed, for you, within the messenger of God, is a prime example for you to follow. What they feel is, the prime example is how the Prophet was being led in his decision making through the Quran. I don't feel that is the case. I feel the prime example of the Prophet is the study of the personal characteristics of the Prophet and how he is being molded and how these beautiful characteristics are being brought to their fullness. And the Quran cannot be studied in isolation of the Blessed Prophet. It has to have the Prophet as an integral part of studies. It cannot be separated from the Blessed Prophet. So the uswa of the Blessed Prophet is actually the whole being of the Blessed Prophet, how he has evolved and how that has become a message for us to embody. We come to the discussion of Karbala now. Imam Hussein makes the intention of leaving Medina. Now the people of Kufa hear that he's en route to Makkah. As he is advancing to Makkah, they write letters to him, calling him over to Kufa to lead them in a revolt against Yazid. So he has these letters with him. Has he made up his mind to go to Kufa? We find either Muhammad ibn Hanafiya or Ibn Abbas approaching him and saying, "What have you decided?" And he said, "I've decided to go to Kufa." So they said, "Why don't you not stay in Makkah or Medina? It's safer for you." He said, "No, I feel a threat of being assassinated in Makkah and Medina. And I do not want the sanctity of Makkah and Medina to be violated by the spilling of my blood." The son of Khalifa Umar comes to him, Muhammad Abdullah bin Umar. And he says to Imam Hussein, "Well, why do you go there?" Now here Imam Hussein, this is what I've read somewhere. He says to Abdullah bin Umar, "Had your father been here today, he would have supported me with his sword, unsheathed, as he supported the Messenger of Allah." He met with Muhammad ibn Hanafiya, his half-brother, and he said, "Go back to Medina and tell them this is what is transpiring. And I am heading off to Kufa." En route to Kufa, he finds somebody approaching and he asks of where he is coming from, and he said he's coming from Kufa. He said, "What is the news that you bring of the people of Kufa?" He was told, "Their hearts are with you, but their swords are against you." He asked, "What has happened? What news do you bring of my brother Muslim?" He said he has been beheaded and his body has been thrown from on top of the Darul Imara and dragged through the streets, and his head and Hani's head have been paraded everywhere to teach the people a lesson for what he will do to rebellions. Imam Hussein stopped at that place. This is what we read from popular literature. He gathered the children of Muslim and consoled them. And there were cries that were heard. And as he consoled them, the word yatim was heard. He called for the little children of Muslim. His daughter, he set her in his lap and he said, "Oh child, I am your father. You are not without a father. You are not a yatim." The Dhakirin state, little Sakina hears this word yatim, does not understand, asks, "What is a yatim?" I will say, "Oh child, it will not be long when there shall come upon you a dreadful night. Your garments shall be set ablaze. Your earrings shall be extracted forcefully. Your face shall be slapped. At that point you will call out, 'Oh Father, why have you forsaken me on such a night?' And when you hear no response, then know that you are a yatim." Matem Hussein.
Ya Hussein, 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 Ya Hussein. غم کی ہے نشانی یہ ماہ محرم کا، 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 غم کی ہے نشانی اس ماہ میں لٹ گئی، اس ماہ میں لٹ گئی اکبر کی جوانی یہ ماہ محرم کا، غم کی ہے نشانی یہ ماہ محرم کا، غم کی ہے نشانی اس ماہ میں لٹ گئی، اس ماہ میں لٹ گئی اکبر کی جوانی یہ ماہ محرم کا، غم کی ہے نشانی یہ ماہ محرم کا، غم کی ہے نشانی صدیاں ہی گزر گئی ہے ہو جاتی ہے پھر بھی، صدیاں ہی گزر گئی ہے ہو جاتی ہے پھر بھی اس ماہ میں اس ظلم کی تازہ وہ کہانی یہ ماہ محرم کا، غم کی ہے نشانی یہ ماہ محرم کا، غم کی ہے نشانی صدیاں ہی گزر گئی ہے ہو جاتی ہے پھر بھی، صدیاں ہی گزر گئی ہے ہو جاتی ہے پھر بھی اس ماہ میں اس ظلم کی تازہ وہ کہانی یہ ماہ محرم کا، غم کی ہے نشانی یہ ماہ محرم کا، غم کی ہے نشانی سہراب رہے ہوتے ہر سارے یزیدی، سہراب رہے ہوتے ہر سارے یزیدی بند ان پہ ہی تھا لوگوں حج کا تھا پانی یہ ماہ محرم کا، غم کی ہے نشانی یہ ماہ محرم کا، غم کی ہے نشانی اسے دیکھ کے یاد آتا ہے صغرا کا بچھڑنا، اسے دیکھ کے یاد نشانی یہ ماہ محرم کا غم کی ہے نشانی اس ماہ میں ہے لٹ گئی اس ماہ میں ہے لٹ گئی اکبر کی جوانی یہ ماہ محرم کا غم کی ہے نشانی یہ ماہ محرم کا غم کی ہے نشانی
محمد صلی اللہ